Are you happy in your work? Well, that's certainly not a question I get asked very regularly. But in the civil service, navel gazing is an annual routine. Sketch writer Quentin Letts of The Times writes for this week's magazine that feedback forms and people surveys have turned the blob into a bureaucratic machine, incapable of getting work done. But is he right? He's with me now to discuss. Now, Quentin, you write in this week's magazine about the Civil Service People Survey. Tell us what inspired you to write about this.
Well, there was a select committee in which the Chief Operating Officer of the Civil Service, Alex Chisholm, I almost called him Sir Alex, was giving evidence about this thing along with two other top mandarins. This is the People Survey where they basically, the Civil Service goes to 350,000 civil servants and does to them what happens in cheap restaurants when someone comes along and says, everything all right with your meal? And this is the civil service saying to its employees, is there anything you want to complain about? And guess what? They do. They do want to complain about. And the main thing they want to complain about is pay.
Yeah.
So they say, we think we're being worked too hard and we're not being paid enough. And therefore, there is now then evidence for pay rises. It's a wonderful circle.
You've been covering Westminster now for about 30-odd years. How was the... Sorry to remind you. How was the quality of Mandarin of Sir Humphrey changed in that time?
Well, it was not so evidently subpar. The civil servants of old tended not to be seen very much and didn't do nearly as many select committees. And therefore, we had an ideal that they were these great figures in Elysium who were able. And now that we can see them, we realise they're anything but able, and they're frightful wafflers. And Chisholm has a wonderful voice, very deep voice. He's downside, he went to INSEAD, went to Oxford. He's all the business. But he talks seamless balls, if we can say that. And really, it just comes out of him like a long stream of sausage. And there he was with two other people doing the same next to him.
Must have been quite a tough experience for you.
These select committees become like this. But going back to your question about the civil servants, I suspect that they have always probably been not as good as we hoped or we imagined. But it's quite good, if you're not very good, to keep quiet about it and not to be seen on parade. So my advice to mandarins is, if you're asked to do a select committee, say no.
And you've had a bit of a run-in with Alex Chisholm when you write in this week's magazine.
Oh, well, not really. I had a run-in with his mater. I wrote about him before in the Times, and I took the rise slightly. And Mother Chisholm wrote in from, I think, Hampshire. A steaming missive arrived from me, handwritten in ink, and almost levitating off the desk. She was so angry with me, and I loved it. I thought she was terrific. And she put me firmly in my place. She's obviously, a proper old dragon. And I've fallen in love with Mrs. Chisholm now. But, her son is still worthy of a certain amount of satire.
And what do you think about you sort of talk about the civil service being a sort of conspiracy about the side of a blob? Do you think that they're capable enough to mount a coup against the government?
Well, they are quite good. The one thing they're good at, the civil service, is taking tax out of our pockets. It's funny, when it comes to actually doing stuff that looks after them, or giving them the money to pay themselves, they are quite good. And so they do this people survey, 350,000 people. I think there's something like 17,000 business units in the civil service, get this, and across 100 departments. And it's quite a big operation. It obviously has a team of people who are needed. I must say, listening to that select committee, do you remember the Bird and Fortune sketches on the Bremner show? It was very like that, where the self-justifications and about how important it all was, about how much hard work it was. And not only do they have the survey, they also have surveys of the survey, and they have benchmarking, and they have best practice. And there's also an international element where the OECD is involved, and so that presumably necessitates foreign fact-finding trips over weekends in glorious places like Strasbourg and sunnier climes. But I don't know, I mean, it's a rude question, James, but have you ever mined your belly button for fluff? I have. I sometimes do it. And you can find things. It's quite a Moorish activity. You look down and you say, oh, that's interesting. You sort of find bits of old lunch. And the more you do it, the more you want to do it. And it becomes a terrible time waster. And this is basically what this people survey is. It's a terrible time-wasting, belly button fluff mining operation.
And I think it was Peter Hennessy who coined the phrase that is often in Whitehall, it's not so much about evidence-based policy making as policy-based evidence making, where you get to this kind of endless cycle of stuff.
Peter would have loved this, but of course Peter was the tutor of Simon Case, who is the head of the civil service. And why on earth, at a time when our tax rates are shooting up, when our national debt is shooting up, what we're doing, wasting time and money on this, I don't know. And it was not disclosed how much this cost, but one dreads to think. They were asked how often people looked at these dashboards. They have dashboards, of course, for this people survey, and 17,000 civil servants a day look at this thing.
But, you know, this survey, wouldn't you like to be asked how you're feeling at work?
Not wildly. I've never been, in all those years you mention of being a hack, I've never been asked. I can't remember ever being asked, are you happy? And what a waste of time. Let's just get on with the job.
And my final question, Quentin, I mean, you've been covering Whitehall for 30-odd years or so. I'm sure there'll be some aspiring mandarins watching this at home, young civil servants. What kind of tips would you give them on, if you're going to be in a select committee, you can't get out of it, what are the best ways to waffle and prevaricate that you've seen from your many years watching these things?
Give very short answers.
Very short answers.
Give yes or no, and then the MP hasn't had time to think up a next. It's the same at Prime Minister's questions. Brevity is all. Brevity is completely confounding. It throws them. And also that way you get out of it quicker because they'll run out of questions.
Well, there we are for those watching at home. Thank you, Quentin.